Hi everyone, welcome and Happy New Year. Bienvenue tout le monde et bonne année. My name is Isabelle Caille, the Director of Sports Safety at the Coaching Association of Canada. Je m'appelle Isabelle Caillé, je suis la directrice de sécurité dans le sport à l'ACA. Today we want to thank you for being here for our fourth of six in our Coaching Through COVID series. The purpose of these webinars is really to support and re-engage coaches returning to sport. We're attempting to pilot this in a bilingual format, so please, we hope you can enjoy the webinar in the language of your choice. And so we do have a call line for you to listen to this presentation in French, and it is in the chat for you. I just wanted to acknowledge that the land that we're gathered on, I'm here in Ottawa today on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. And the land that surrounds us is part of who we are and it reflects our history. So I welcome you all from across this vast country today. And so the format for our webinar today will be approximately 30-minute presentation by Dr. Ivan Joseph, followed by question and answer period for all the participants on the call today. So we do encourage you to provide your questions in the chat and we will manage them and provide them to Ivan to respond to you. And at the end of the session, we'll ask you to do a quick survey to give us some feedback on the experience and any other ideas that you might have. So I just want to do a very quick introduction and then I'm going to turn it over to Ivan. So we're extremely excited to have you today, Ivan. And Ivan is so Dr. Ivan Joseph, he was a soccer coach in the US. He's an author of a book entitled You've Got This. He's a researcher. He was an athletic director with Ryerson University, and he was one of the first to pilot a female coach mentorship that we started here at the CAC. He is currently the VP of Student Affairs at Wilfrid Laurier University. And so he also has a TED Talk that I encourage you to view. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Ivan, to get us started. And thanks again for being with us today.
Merci. Thank you for having me. Thanks, folks. I'm just going to have a 30-minute conversation about some of the lessons I learned along the way during my coaching career. I was going to tell you how long my coaching career was, but then you'd be able to work backwards and figure out my age, and I want my youthful, exuberant appearance to fool you. So that's not true. But let me just say, the first 5 years of my coaching career, I spent all my time doing my coaching licenses, my endorsements, working on my technical and tactical things. I was pursuing that holy grail of trying to become a national champion. And I remember one year I got so close. We lost 1-0. I'm a soccer coach. We lost 1-0 to Columbia University in the dying minutes of overtime. And I was crushed. I was devastated. And I remember thinking, okay, I looked at that Columbia team and was like, okay, they have way more talent. That team is full of international players. I know what I need to do to close the gap. And so I brought 8 top quality international players in. Oh man, this is going to be great. They were talented. They were fluid. You want to talk about the beautiful game? I had a guy from Argentina. He was the son of a World Cup star. I had another guy from Trinidad and Tobago who was an Olympic U20 national team player. I had the player of the year from California. Oh, man. And we started winning games. Until the very last game where it was ready for the playoff time, our first playoff game, and we lost badly. In fact, we lost 5-0. A much more talented team lost 5-0. What happened was during the year, our winning was hiding these things that were wrong with our program. I had created 2 teams unbeknownst to myself, a team of what I'll call the hardworking Midwesterners and a team of the talented, fluid playing internationals. And this giant gap and divide kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And when we were caught behind a rock in a hard place, when the chips were down, when we had to fight for each other, we did not. And what I realized then was that the team had their own revolt. They revolted against me. They revolted against each other. And the fault was mine. I had spent a lot of time on the winning, on the X's and the O's, and I didn't spend a lot of time on intentionally thinking about culture. That team came to me, and as I started to think about discipline and the rules and accountability and who we were going to be and what we were going to be about, 7 of the 8 left. They didn't no, yeah, you are a Canadian guy. You don't know soccer. We come from the beautiful countries in South America and Europe. We are leaving. And they left. And it was hard. And I had to start over. And I had to start over the next year. And I thought about being and creating culture. And I thought about it from the very ground up because I didn't want to be there. And I would love to say that when I brought in all these players, it was magical and mystical, but it wasn't. It was hard work. But here's what I started to do. You know, the video you didn't see was an Apple video. It's from the Crazy Ones. It was a 1997 video. And I showed it at the very beginning of the season for every single team I coach for decades. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules and they have no respect for the status quo. You could ignore them, you could vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is change them because they see things differently. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. The reason I showed that 1-minute video was I wanted everybody to understand what our purpose was going to be as a team. Principle number 1, be clear on your purpose of who you are as a team. The goal was no longer about winning national championships. The goal was to be changing the world and leaving it better than we found it. I made sure that we had a clear statement of purpose. Mine was, I am an educator first and foremost. And I wanted everybody to understand what that meant. That meant I gave people second chances. That meant I may give people third chances. That meant everything I was doing was about teaching and trying to develop young men. I was really intentional, though, when doing so, right? I had to be really intentional because before I even got to that video, I did what I'll call principle number 2, which is I want to make sure it's recruit on the front end. People always say, well, why isn't that number 1? I just like recruiting on the front end to be number 2 because when I am going to bring people into my team, if any of our university players are there or have the luxury of being able to select, I was really intentional in being and talking about who we were, meaning opening up your kimono and show your warts. We don't recruit on the front end sometimes. We want to make sure that everything looks smooth, everything looks great. We hide some of our tough rules or our challenges. And what happens when we don't recruit on the front end is at the first sign of discomfort and things that people don't like, they look over the fence and they want to bail. They want to get out of your team. I've seen those university teams who don't have players that stay to their 3rd and their 4th year or their 5th year because it wasn't that good there. They told me after I got there that there was no drinking on campus, or that there was guys were in one dorm and ladies were in another dorm, or that there was no visitation, or that, I had to spend Thanksgiving here and train. It's really important that in the recruiting process, we are clear and transparent in our expectations so that people aren't surprised. What happens when you're trying to build a high performance culture is that you will attract the people who are like-minded if you're really upfront about all the things that you might consider warts that might drive somebody away from your team, whatever that might be. Hey, do you know that we have a curfew? Hey, do you know that we have a fitness test that you must adhere to? Hey, do you know that we have mandatory study hall? Well, I don't want that. That's not for me. What the heck? I coached in a very small podunk little town. If I told people there was no alcohol being served in our town and they showed up here and they're like, where's the bar? Then that's my fault, right? I needed to tell them, hey, folks, there's no alcohol in this town. If you want the bar life, this is the wrong place for you to come and play soccer, right? When I did that, I got like-minded people. Don't forget how important that is. Once I thought about that, once I got past that and I got people there and I shared them our purpose and our mission and our vision and our values, then I gave examples of it. Sometimes when we speak about a high performance culture and we talk about a purpose, we talk about our values, we're just too conceptual. We have to give concrete examples of exactly what that behavior looks like, what it means like to live and be a part of our values. So when I talk about we are a team of integrity, my example for young men don't park in the accessible parking spot. The sign, the parking space that has the wheelchair and the accessible sign in front of it is not for you when you're running late. When I talk about we are committed to excellence, what I mean by that is we sit in the front 2 rows of the class. What it means is that if your GPA falls below 2.50, you don't get to play, right? When I talk about we graduate our students to be citizens of tomorrow, what does that look like? If our program doesn't have a certain graduation rate, and we did this at Ryerson, I don't care if it's the national tournament, you don't get to play because your grades are more important to me than our university winning a medal. As a coach, can you be concrete in those examples when you're talking about the culture, the purpose, the mission, the vision, so that your players know what it means and they can hang their hat on it and they're not surprised by it? Equally as important is what it doesn't mean, because then they have to know, like, if you do this, you're not adhering to our culture. If you show up 15 or 20 minutes or 30 minutes late, you're not part of what this culture of excellence looks like. And you're not going to get every single one. Like, that's not the point. But can you give them examples to really kind of hang their teeth and kind of like, okay, yes, I know what this is like. I know what that's in. I'm ready to go. Here's the piece then now we get to from a point of view is like, okay, we've got that. We've got our folks. We recruited on the front end. We know what there is. We know what the purpose is. And everybody does role communication. But I want to make sure that everybody gets this piece. What I say, clear and enticing roles. I'm really specific when I'm thinking about clarity of roles and enticing those roles. And they're very specific to what I want. And that to my coaching style, to my playing style, to my culture style. And they're not all technical and tactical pieces. So let's just say I have a team, my soccer team. I might have a role, let's say it's my center mids. I might have what's known as, the alpha center mid. And the 3 things I'm going to give, they're the rhythm keeper of the team, right? They complete, 90% of their passes in the defensive half of the field. Okay. They're the initiator of the attack. They lead the team in assists. Okay. Number 3, they can create their own pass. They're among my most technical players on the team, right? And that might be just those 3 things that I have for them. And this is really important. I don't want to put 9 roles or 10 roles. I think about what are the 3 to 5 most intentional, most critical things that player needs to have to be, really successful and move and bring our team to the highest level, right? When I do a goalkeeper, another one I'll do, goalkeeper, make the saves we expect you to make. Number 1. Number 2, make 1 big save a game. Number 3, be one of the most vocal players on our team. Number 4, be leaderful, right? And I define that as being engaging, inclusive, and welcoming. Spend time to really think about what those characteristics are of those players, because that role clarity is really critical for players to understand, because then they know what spot they need to go to. And you might have offensive players, you might have defensive players, you might have players on the bench, you might have first off the bench, you might have practice players, but all of those roles need to be really defined. People don't spend time thinking about the reserve players and what role they play on a team. My reserve players, to be comfortable recognizing that you won't play this year. What? That's the characteristic? Absolutely. To be willing to be the hardest worker in practice, knowing that that's where you get to shine. Whatever those kinds of clarification are, I want you to think about that when creating that culture so that people really get to think about it. When you have role clarity, the next piece is role acceptance. And this is really important. I do formal feedback, and I know coaches, we are always giving informal feedback, but I want you to think about formal feedback, and I give it 3 times a year. I give it at the end of preseason. I give it midway through the season, and I give it at the end of the year. And this is really important for us to think about. And my questions, and I think these are the questions that have really set me apart in terms of really understanding role clarity, acceptance, and creating the culture that we want. Formal feedback, this is my principle, formal feedback must be two-way, right? Formal feedback must be two-way, and it must be frequent enough that it allows people the opportunity to show that learning has occurred or a change of behavior has occurred. At the end of the season, at the end of the preseason, after we've chosen our team, after they've worked like dogs, the question I'm asking, all right? Tell me something I did by accident or on purpose during preseason that really helped you play your best. Question 2, tell me something I did on accident that I might not be aware of that you need me to stop doing, that demotivates you or doesn't allow you to play your best, right? Number 3, how would you like me to deliver critical feedback to you? I don't know, coach. And then I become more specific. Do you prefer your critical feedback one-on-one or in a group setting, right? And equally as important, how do you prefer me to deliver praise to you, right? Those are key questions that really get the best out of players because they're not going to come and find you and take the guessing out of it. Question number 4, what's something that you saw somewhere else that we need to bring here? Something so outstanding, so excellent that you wish we would bring here. That's the two-way piece of feedback. The critical piece, something I did wrong, something I'm not doing, something I need to improve on. We as coaches, we put a lot of our time and our effort into this, and we're not thinking about that critical two-way piece. I remember at the end of the season doing this piece, and this is where I brought in 2-minute and 30-second time games that were really competitive. This is where I went from having a decal on the front of my t-shirt for my practice t-shirt to making the decal really small, just in the corner, right? Just something really simple. This is how we brought in a nutritionist to our team. This is how we stopped doing fitness training during the course of the season. And the result was we had some of our best performances. And I know that's really hard. Like, what? You know, there's some of these folks are just young. They're just 14, they're just 15, they're just 16. I don't think any player is too young to feel like they matter and they belong when you ask for feedback. And I think that's really important, that principle of two-way feedback. Once we've got that, and just going through a list of things I want you to be thinking about, is I want you to think about this whole principle of how to make people feel like they matter and they belong, right? I opened up with that story about how I created these 2 teams, but just the language of me telling you, did you recognize my bias? And I said it that way intentionally. Hard-working Midwestern players and these international players with talent and skill, right? Immediately I say internationals versus Midwestern. I say talent versus hardworking, as if talent is not equal to hardworking. I didn't make people feel like they mattered and they belonged. I didn't invest in relationships. The number one thing that builds high performance culture is that whole principle of cohesion that many of you have heard me talk about before. That whole principle that says, when I know that you care, then I'm willing to run through the wall for you. Way back in the 90s, they did a study at the NBA teams about which teams would be the highest performer and would most likely win the Hugh O'Brien trophy, their championship. And they found the result wasn't the team with the most height. It wasn't the team with the biggest salary cap. It wasn't the team with the #1 draft picks or the most all-stars. It was the team that had the most cohesion, measured in a way that was how many physical touches they had between each other through the season. How many fist bumps, how many high fives, how many hugs, how many hand gestures, butt taps, whatever it was that showed genuine caring and affection and feelings of mutual acquaintance for each other. The thing is that we don't spend time building those things in. How do you build a cohesive culture? When people are so sometimes pitted against each other, competing for spots, going after the very things that they want. We have to slow down, and it doesn't mean that we don't create competition in practice, but it does mean that we need to think about trying to figure out how we can build the social bonds with each other. So what do we do? Right? Here are the things that we do. We do what's known as 16 questions. Well, it's an exercise. And it starts from low risk to medium risk to high risk. And there's just things of vulnerability, values clarification. Here's an exercise. What's the origin of your middle name? Do you prefer winter over summer? If you could play another sport besides soccer, what would it be? Again, low risk. Give us the last time you laughed so hard you cried, right? Low risk. Then we go into some medium risk questions. Tell us about something you're embarrassed about. Tell us about something that gives you great pride and that you've accomplished. Tell us about a mistake that you wish you could do over. Ooh, that's a little bit high risk. Tell us about the next time you cried, last time you cried, and that's a little bit more risky. When you can walk through some simple questions, some warm, fuzzy ones, then a little bit more riskier ones, then a little bit more challenging and revealing and vulnerable ones, people will peel away the masks and the facades that hold them back. And what you start to see is that we have lots of values that are in alignment and connected. If we don't spend a lot of time thinking about how we get to know each other and how we build cohesion on a team, and I'm not just talking general team building, but beyond that, then what happens is we don't go for each other. And we don't go to bat for each other. And we talked about that. We talked about that, especially in this world where I'll say craziness is happening, that we have to be aware of the biases that we have that sometimes limit that high performance culture. I would be remiss to say if I wasn't mindful of all the things happening in the world today, in the Black world, the white world, the international students world, how we have to be really, really mindful of checking our biases at the door and being intentional in sharing to our students how those biases work on the field or the court or the pitch or in the pool. I'll give you a perfect example of a story I shared when I was talking about how we need to understand how we might interact with each other just because we're different. I shared with them this story about a Harvard study that I was reading where they were looking at a murder mystery that was going to be solved by members of a fraternity or a sorority. And they would say, okay, John, take a look at this murder mystery. You got 20 minutes. Who did it? And they would look and they would study and they would read it and they was like, okay, Professor Plum with the pipe wrench in the basement, or Dr. Zhivago with the candelabra in the library. Okay, nice job. And they would come back and they say, okay, hold on to your answer. Now I want you 3 members of your fraternity or sorority to get together and solve the same mystery. Now we know what fraternities are like. They're like a team. They're tight. They got their own rituals, their own bonds, their own colors, their secret handshakes. They're as homogeneous and tight a unit as you can imagine. Probably similar values, similar upbringings, similar things that matter to them. And so the 3 people, whether a fraternity or sorority, would solve the same murder mystery, and they would have 20 minutes to solve it. But 5 minutes in, they would be joined by somebody else. The somebody else was either a member from the same fraternity or sorority or somebody from another fraternity or sorority that they didn't know. All right? So solve the mystery. And they're like, well, somebody we know, okay, going along. Somebody like, okay. At the end of the 20 minutes, they were asked to provide their answer, right? Professor Klum, yes. Here's the catch. As you could imagine, the 3 people that had somebody from their same fraternity join them, we asked them, how did it go? Great. How was it? Excellent. How smooth? Perfect. Would you do it again? Yeah. How do you feel about your answer? 100% confident we know the answer. And then they would ask the same questions from when they brought somebody else in from a different fraternity. How was it? Oh, that was rough. Would you do it? Did it go smoothly? It was hard work. Would you do it again? I don't know. How do you feel about your answer? I'm not sure. I don't know. This is what we would expect. They know each other. Rhythm. Yeah, it's discombobulated. But here's the truth of the matter, right? The people who came from a different group, who brought in somebody else from a different fraternity, were 3 times more likely to get the right answer than the group of the same like-minded, homogeneous folks, right? Even though they thought it was harder and they thought, I don't know if we got it right, they had more self-doubt, they were more likely to be a high-performing unit. The truth of the matter is, high performance happens in groups where the group think isn't the same, because we challenge each other, we push each other, we move and are willing to look at things differently. High performance works. It's harder, but it works if we're intentional in holding and building those people together. But what do we as coaches do? It's the first sign of conflict. The first time that it goes rough and bumpy, we pull them apart. We don't want it to happen. We don't want to give them the resources. We don't think it's going to be as successful. You know, you can say studies of time and time again have looked at high performance culture. If they got 4 white folks asking for resources, they're more likely to get it, right? If you got 4 black folks asking for resources, again, they're more likely to get it. But for some reason, as soon as you put 2 white folks and 2 black folks together asking for the same resources, they're less likely to get it. In fact, studies have shown where you read the same script, the same problem, ask for the same resources, and go to people that are outside of the group, they always interpret the diversity on the team as having more conflict. That, again, is about creating an inclusive culture. How do we check that bias? What do we need to do as coaches to build that when we have it on a team? Well, number one is stop being culture blind. And what I mean by that is, as when I was a young coach, I used to say, okay, we're all the same, we're all the same, we're all equal, right? We're all in this together, we're all in this group. And instead, the researcher said is we need to move to culture celebration. Recognize the difference, praise the difference, have whatever the difference is highlighted. There's nothing wrong with that. And that might be counter to our general intuition. What? Recognize the difference, point it out, have the moment to celebrate it? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because if you don't do it, you know what happens? And you get that mumbling that happens all the time. You get that grumbling that happens all the time. It's like, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. If we don't take the moment to not just celebrate, but highlight and to showcase and make people feel like they matter and they belong, then we will lose the talent that makes our team diverse and stronger and different and able to be, I'll say, a high-performing culture. I'll close with this last one. And this is this piece about recognizing that we're all in this together. Some of the best some of the best moments I've had have been by accident. And so this isn't about the formal feedback piece, but this is about me getting out of my own way and getting out of my pride. We as coaches will always make mistakes, right? But if we don't take a moment to think about how can we give grace to the players who have made mistakes themselves and take our role as educators first, as opposed to national champions or as opposed to game-winning coaches that are trying to get to the next level, if we don't give our players grace, then we've missed the whole role of what sport is to do, all right? Which is, from my perspective, create better citizens, to create people that add value to our community, to build grit and resilience and opportunities and confidence in the people that we are in charge of for whatever that small window of their life might be. And that's sometimes hard because sometimes the grace is the altercation or the challenge has been directly against us. But if you can take a moment to recognize what your purpose is, if it might be you're an educator first and foremost, I believe good things will happen. I'm mindful that I only had 30 minutes, and that was the length of my speech. But I want to close with one last piece because I think it's really important. And I say this because it's probably been the single most important thing that has led to a high performance culture for me. Is who are the people that you're surrounding yourself with, right? If you've talked about those enticing roles and responsibilities, you've talked about your purpose, you've got clarity of roles, all of these sorts of things, I just want you to think about the people, not just on your staff, but recognizing the people who you're spending the most time with outside of your staff and what that influence is on you and how you're trying and how it makes you lead and how it makes you act. As a coach, high performance culture and high performance behavior can't start and stop when you step on the field. People are always looking at us. And those values that we're trying to carry through and put on the field, they have to live when you're outside the lines. And that's a hard one, because sometimes, and I'll say it just for my case, sometimes it's easier when I'm not holding myself up to that high performance or that high standard. But I am mindful that the expectations I set for myself and the expectations that I'm setting for the people around me, they automatically bleed and flow into my coaching world, whether I know it or not. It's a subconscious way of impacting and influencing my leadership. And I think we just need to be mindful of that. Recognize those pieces that are critical and negative and toxic to what you're trying to do, and may influence you to deviate from your path and limit your interaction with them. And I know that's sometimes challenging, but to me, it's a surefire way to move in the right direction. I thank you for allowing me to share some principles today with you about a high performance culture. I'm happy to engage in some conversations and some questions that you might have that can dive into these topics a little further. Thank you.
Bonjour. Thank you, Ivan. So in the chat box, you're more than welcome to write in your question in there, or you can also use the raise hand button and then just verbally ask your question also for Dr. Ivan. I'm just going to repeat it in French. Alors, s'il vous plaît, écrire vos questions dans la boîte ci-dessous ou appuyer sur la main pour être capable de lever votre main puis de poser votre question verbalement. So our first question we have is, they're looking for examples of the questions you ask for their strategic feedback. So would you have like a template that maybe we can send on afterwards?
I can send you those in an email, but yeah. And again, they're not, I don't ask a lot of questions, right? What's something you're doing really well? What's something you're doing, what's something I'm doing really well? What's something that I'm doing that's frustrating? What do you see somewhere else, right? How do you want to receive feedback? Right? Those are important ones. And I think one I didn't mention, I'll send these to you by email, but I think it's really important when I do those roles and clarities, clarity of role, my question is, what role do you see yourself playing on this team? I don't want to assign them a role. I want them to start the conversation. Because then you'll be surprised where some of them might identify themselves. I'll say most people identify themselves in the right spot. But then that's an opportunity for me to say, here's why, here's where I see you, and here's why. And then I lead. The final question is, are you willing to accept that role to be a part of this team? And I think that's really, really important, right? Get them to identify their role. Are they willing to accept this role to be a part of this team?
Perfect, thank you. Question number 2. What surprises did you get from asking about the, I'll start over. What surprises did you get from asking about the how to deliver critical feedback and praise to your athletes in the group settings or individually?
Yeah, I'll say in the first thing, I was surprised how many people don't like praise in a public setting, right? And, and I know the literature says most women don't like praise in a public setting. That's, I was surprised it was from both genders. So that was a surprise to me, right? I was also surprised how many people would say, I don't care how you give me feedback. And then I would have to turn back and say, well, that's interesting because I yelled here and I noticed this happened to you. Sometimes I had to draw the correlation between their performance and my bad behavior to recognize how I thought they needed to change, right? And so that's part of their education, because they all want, like, I don't care, you can give it to me anyway. I don't mind you yelling at me, coach. Well, that's not necessarily true. Let me tell you what I noticed from your behavior. Let me tell you what I noticed from your body language. And so that was a key piece. Is a lot of people, this is the first time somebody asks them that question. And so the typical automatic response is just like, how you doing? Fine. Well, sometimes people aren't fine, but that's the automatic response that comes out of their mouth. I think the same can be said about feedback.
Perfect, thank you. Another question here from Sabrina. thank you for sharing all your principles in creating a high-performance culture. I'm an university track and field coach and wonder, do you think these principles are as valuable in individual team sports as compared to a more traditional team sports?
Well, I will tell you this. For 10 years, I was a track and field hurdle coach in the States, having coached an NAIA conference and national ranked athlete. And I will say yes. From my experiences, absolutely. Number one, when you think about it, right, you might say, well, it's hard to get cohesion on a track and field team. They got the multi-events, you got the sprinters. No, the hurdlers were their group. I remember our hurdlers doing their own mission statement, right? And I can't remember it word for word, but it was something like, we are high flyers, you know, something like that. And they wanted to be like known, you know, we are as fast and as good as the sprinters. They always felt like they were in competition, like they were never as good. So that was really key for them. And I remember it's just as important. How do you give individual players feedback? And so that's a long answer for me saying, I think it's so, especially in track, because you have those groups that could be their own units, and you have the big team. I think it's harder to do in track, though. Don't get me wrong.
Perfect. Thank you. Another question we have here from Lisa is, how do you build grit?
Oh, it's a great question. You're into a whole nother piece, but I'll give you a couple of things. Let's make sure we're all on the same page, right? Grit is our response, how we get our response to failure, right? Our unwillingness to give up despite setbacks. And so part of that is that part of my job is to set my team up for failure a lot in the beginning of a preseason, right? Because if they don't have any experience dealing with failure, we've got problems. And I want you to think about what that means. If I'm in a preseason, I don't want to win 5 games and figure out, oh my gosh, how do we handle this? Now we're behind. We go into the season and then we're in trouble. I'll never forget, I had a season where I was 19-0 and we were into the last three games of the season. I was nervous. I'm like, we are 19-0 and we have never been behind. We were the #1 ranked team in the country. And so I remember putting us in a position where I rested several starters, and I was nervous because this could backfire. And we ended up losing the game 1-0, right? Hit 4 posts, all this sort of stuff. And my starters were really frustrated. But I am convinced to this day, because we went into the playoffs and we were behind 2-0, and we ended up winning that game 4-3 in overtime. And I'm convinced that it was the experience of being behind and being frantic and being harried prepared us for that playoff game that qualified us for the national tournament. So that's a long answer, is put yourself in failure. Number 2 is develop your people the coping skills to respond to failure, whether that's your affirmations, whether that's your interpretation of failure, whether that's getting rid of that maladaptive perfectionism. So let me give you 3 simple examples. Number 1, write a confidence letter to yourself. That helps develop grit, because when you're failing or when you have doubt, you bring that letter out. Number 2, 3 affirmations a day, right? Complex problems get solved faster. Happiness goes up, right? 3 affirmations a day. Number 3, teach your players, when body language happens, when somebody's head goes down, when their hand goes down, physical gestures to stop those thoughts and reframe them in a positive way, right? Finally, I think the most important thing is, as coaches, stop bragging about outcomes and start praising process. When we brag about outcomes, only praise the goal scorer instead of the person who did the work, recognize that when we can move beyond the outcome and praise the people who are involved in the process, then people stop hanging their hat and their pride on only the amazing and great things that happen.
Very well. I think you've answered this question a little bit, but I'm still going to pose it just in case there's more things that you need to answer for that. So the question is, what would be a typical way you start your session or season to constantly build and establish a relationship with players?
Oh, great piece. So the way I start my season, number 1, is the same way I start my athletic director year, and it's the same way I started my job as a vice president. we go away on a retreat, right? We go away on a retreat, and like at the very beginning, and when I was a coach, it was with no phones, but in that retreat, it's a whole bunch of activities meant to build relationships. We do a talent show. We do personality development and inventory. Whether it's the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs, the blue-green, whatever it is, I do a lot of those sorts of things in team building and leadership development pieces. I give people complex problems to solve as part of that initiative. So boom, that's really the very start. Let's say we've done that. Now, the same way I lead every single meeting as a vice president is the same way I open up every single practice session. The first 15 minutes of my meeting as a vice president is a question. Last week, the question was, what was your most favorite gift you gave? And what was the most favorite gift you received? Once the week before, it was, what's your favorite spot you went on vacation? Number 3, what's your least favorite food of a candy to eat? You'd be surprised how many people said black licorice. But those types of activities at the beginning of the season of practice is the most important thing. I'll share with you really quickly an Anson Dorrance story. Everybody knows who Anson Dorrance is, coach of North Carolina women's soccer. I think they won 14 national championships in a 20-year span. Once he was coaching both teams, and he noticed when he had already done really great things with the women, so they asked him to coach the men. And when he was doing the men, he would then go over to the women. But he noticed when he'd look over, the women were just lollygagging and goofing around and just shooting the breeze and wasting the first 15, 20 minutes of their practice time. So he hired a specialist, a fitness, strength, and conditioning guy to get those guys warmed up and ready to go and physically fit so that when he showed up, he didn't waste any time. He said it was the worst season they ever had. And at the end of the year, when doing the feedback sessions, what came back from the players? Coach, you took away the best time of our practice. We don't see each other. We're all over campus. This is where we catch up. This is where we know who's dating who, or who did really well on a math class, or who's got a problem. We missed this. We missed the opportunity to be successful. We missed all these great things. And by doing that, we ruined it for them, right? And we didn't think about what that looked like. And so Anson Dorrance said, heck to the no, I'm not doing that anymore. And he stopped doing all that craziness. Really important and critical piece. Never underestimate the value of that.
Perfect. Thank you. We've got 2 more questions. One more is, would Dr. Ivan value certain aspects of high performance coaching over others based on team size and sport?
I would say not based on team size and sport. I would say based on my philosophy of leadership, right? We all have a different philosophy and styles of leadership. So for example, for me, I believe that everybody should play, right? Now, I'm a national championship coach. That's my philosophy. Not everybody plays every game, but throughout the season, everybody should have an opportunity to be rewarded for their effort. Now, hear me clearly. It doesn't mean everybody makes the team, right? I'm not saying that. But everybody should get a chance to play throughout the season. So what's your personal philosophy of leadership? What do you believe in? And allow that to be a part of your principles that you take forward.
Very good. Thank you. And then the last question I have here is, do you find that the upfront principles you mentioned and the nature of your feedback inside of your program resulted in an intake of player buy-in to your program?
Absolutely. And I'll say it this way, by being transparent and upfront, absolutely. Now, here's the key. Am I getting to have 100% buy-in? No. But by sharing the leadership with my team, I was more likely to get adherence to the principles and the protocols I was saying, but you're never going to get 100% buy-in. And this is when I think I want you to really recognize that behavior is stable, or not behavior, personality is stable and enduring. And so you have to recognize that if you've given somebody a chance or 2 or 3 or whatever your threshold is, there's a time when you recognize you can't push a rope, and it's time for you to move those people along from your program, because that toxicity will spread. And it's really important because they look for allies. And so if you can't get buy-in, if people aren't willing, don't take talent, right, over character. And that is really a critical principle.
Thank you very much. Is there any other questions before we have time for a few more? Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? On a le temps pour quelques-unes. Vous pouvez également le dire verbalement au lieu de juste l'écrire. Just looking in the chat here. Yes, I have another one here. What are the first few steps or items you would do when you transition into a new job, but in the same role?
Oh, I just did that. I just transitioned to a new job in a new role. Number one, the first thing what I did was I reflect on the wins and the losses in my previous place. And when I talk about wins and losses, I'm not talking about game win. I'm talking about what did I do well previously? Where were the mistakes that I made along the way? And when I think about those wins and losses, and now I move to the strategy piece. What am I going to do now to reinforce and replicate those wins? And what am I going to do to mitigate those losses, those stumbles, and those mistakes? Who do I need to align? What's the strategy? What's the process? Right? And I think that's really important, is to judge and evaluate yourself with 100% authenticity in your insight in order to apply the learnings to your new environment. I think the other piece is too, no matter what job you have, and I learned this from my previous president at Ryerson and a mentor of mine who's the president at Western. They both said the same thing, is go slow to go fast, which means don't rush in there, guns a-blazing, ready to make all these changes, ready to do all these things. Relax, observe, evaluate, assess, develop a plan, build allies, watch, and pay attention. Right? Do nothing. They both told me for 12 months. And you can imagine I was like ready to go. I got things to do. But by doing nothing for 12 months, I got to build the crucial connections and relationships outside of my department that I needed to move complex initiatives forward.
Thank you. We're getting lots of great feedback here in the chat. People are really enjoying this. I have a few more questions. Does your assistance support staff have a role to play with these principles as well?
Oh, 100%. You know, one of the things I need to recognize is that any high-performing team is only as good as their staff. And so one of the things I try and do is limit my voice when coaching, because I want my voice to have critical importance. I learned this from a professor that was in the Senate in Iowa. He was a famous professor, and I noticed always that he always spoke last. He always spoke infrequently, but whenever he spoke, the entire room locked in and the hush came. And there was a person that spoke all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time, and people ignored it. It was a drone. And I remember saying, this is not by accident. I asked him about it, and he says, wait, pay attention, right? And add your voice only sparingly when it matters, and people will be more willing to adhere to it. And I lay that all out because that's, if I'm able to do that, if I want to do that, then I must imbue and empower my assistant coaches with power and the ability to influence and make decisions and have communications. And so it's critical that their culture and their values are equivalent and equal to mine. That doesn't mean I want them to agree. I don't mind dissenting voices, but how and when and where. But their philosophy of leadership, of education, of being teachers first and foremost is critical in my selecting of them.
Thank you. And the last question, which I guess is one on many people's mind, is any tips on keeping connected with athletes when we can't train in person these days, which is our new reality at the moment, as you know?
You know, I'll say this. I'm coaching the Guyana women's national team. And as you know, most of those players are scattered all over the world. I got some in England, some in Sweden, some in Guyana, Atlanta, US, like all over the world. Lots here in Canada, by the way. And so all of our talk and our communication has only ever been through the virtual world. And you'll recognize how simple it is, the little things that make a difference. And we have forgotten these sorts of things because we have gone so far to a busy world. The handwritten birthday card, the recognizing and paying attention with the phone call, just checking in. Now, I'm assuming that you folks are doing all the things that everybody's doing, which is the Zoom training period and all those sorts of things, the Zoom Friday night or Sunday night. I would say this, though, what I have found to be successful with the Guyana women's team is that when my Zoom connection things have nothing to do with the sport and training, where they're just here to catch up, where it's just shooting the breeze and catching up time. We've also done a book club for leadership, which has been really good. We're reading right now Dr. Bob Rotello's Golf is Not a Game of Perfect. And we read the book as a unit together, and we come in and we discuss it. But those are sorts of things that we're doing. I'm sure that you folks are probably way better than I am. My technology influence is limited at best.
Very well. Thank you very much. It's pretty much up to our time, unless we have a quick comment or a question. I did put in the chat our evaluation, so please take a moment. And again, thank you very much for attending. Il nous reste que quelques petites minutes encore. Alors, si vous avez des questions ou quelque chose que vous aimeriez mentionner, c'est le temps, tout de suite. Dans le chat, j'ai mis le lien pour le feedback. Alors, s'il vous plaît, gênez-vous pas à faire. So lots of comments of thank you very much, awesome presentation, lots of great insights. Seems to be well received.
Take care, folks. Thank you for having me. And if there's one thing I'll tell you, just really bear down on your philosophy and don't be afraid to share it. It's always easier to release that philosophy, but to start tight, right? And that's the one thing that sometimes we forget as coaches. And thank you for showing up. I think you guys are doing a great job leading Canada's sport and youth. So all the best to you.
Thank you very much for taking time, Ivan. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Merci tout le monde. Merci, Ivan. Et je vous souhaite une bonne journée. Have a great day.
Salut.
Thank you so much.
Merci.